What can we learn from the COVID-19 pandemic about risk factors for elder abuse during disasters? Gloria.
Thank you. I'm here wearing my hat as a researcher in two areas. One is elder abuse and the other is in emergencies and disasters. And I'd like to acknowledge, as Marie did, her team, my team, for the information that we're going to present today. I want to review some of the evidence that older people are at higher risk in disasters, look briefly at mortality rates, the type of elder abuse and where it occurs, and present some new information that has not been presented before from two of our studies, and then to end up with some of the novel ways that elder abuse and neglect are manifested or have been manifested in the COVID-19 pandemic. I want to draw your attention to the International Classification of Natural and Technological Disasters. And so most of what we've seen in Canada before are hydrometeorological, or we hear about the earthquakes or tsunamis and so on. The biological includes things like epidemics and insect manifestation and infestation and so on. Depending on the type of disaster, some groups are at greater risk of experiencing social, physical, and or psychological harms during and also after the disaster, when the immediate emergency ends and it's time to start to try to bring life back to normal. Anybody may be at risk at any time, depending on the nature of the disaster and the extent of it. But age is a clear risk factor for disaster-related mortality. It was first really drawn to everybody's attention at the time of the tsunami, which took place in Indonesia. And I had been saying for some years to the Health Canada people that I thought older people were more at risk than others, but we didn't really have much in the way of hard data until the tsunami in Indonesia, and where it was crystal clear that the people most likely to die in that tsunami were old people. This slide shows mortality rates for different countries with respect to this current COVID-19 pandemic. And what you see is the large lines at the top, in case after case, country after country, are in the people who are aged 85 and above. So we see it around the world.
Excuse me, Gloria. Can you share your slides? They're not running. I'm not seeing them.
The slides are not running?
No. Were you going to run them, or did you want, or was Laura, or was
Okay, Sarah, do you want to just run them? If I don't know why they're not showing, because they're showing on the screen.
There we go. So that's slide one. So where do you want to be now?
Okay, so I want the one before that. The one just before. Am I not able to monitor them? Andrew?
I think you should just say change. It looks like either Sarah.
Okay, I can't get out at the moment to get
You
out.
can't see them?
No, I can't see. I can't get out of what I had. Okay. All right.
Can you see them?
Yes. Next slide.
Okay, good.
Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the one I was referring to that shows the bars at the top are the 85, 95, the oldest population in these countries. And that's where the death rates were occurring. Next slide. It occurred to me that we should be asking the question, Could some of these deaths be due to elder abuse or neglect? We've known for some time that child abuse and domestic violence rates go up during and after disasters. But up to now, there's been relatively little hard data, although when you look at risk factors, there's reason to believe that the rates for elder abuse should also increase. Next slide. What this shows is a model that indicates that a disaster occurs when you multiply the type of the hazard by vulnerability. And so we see in this slide on the far right, different types of hazards from earthquakes, cold snaps, droughts, pandemics, and so on. On the left side, it gives us some of the root causes, the pressures, and the conditions that lead to what we would call a disaster or an emergency. Next slide. Internationally, as some of the other speakers have said, we tend to recognize that there are 5 types of abuse or maltreatment of older people: physical, psychological, financial, sexual, neglect. We need to recognize that elder abuse and neglect occur in multiple settings, both in the community and in different types of institutional settings, hospitals, long-term care, assisted living, and so on. The 2 most common types are psychological and financial, and for many people, the victim will experience more than one type. Next slide. There is evidence of abuse and neglect in institutional settings that come to us from Hurricane Katrina and the tsunami in Japan. There were news reports about older people being abandoned by the nursing home and hospital staff as the waters were rising. There were also rumors following Katrina of physical and sexual and financial abuse of older people in the Astrodome and in other settings where they were relocated. And the disaster that took place in Japan, there were reports of some 125 older people, some of them comatose, who were abandoned by the medical staff within 6 miles of the plant. Next slide. In Canada, during COVID-19, there was the time when the Army was called in to help with the residents of some of the Quebec and Ontario nursing homes. And we heard from the military people about some of the dire situations and the neglect that they observed. And so some of these facilities were taken over and run by the province or by the military. Next. It's interesting to note that well, this is that in May of 2020, we were our attention was drawn to the fact that 81% of all deaths from COVID were in nursing homes. If we go to the next slide. Next slide, please. A year later, the distribution was down to 54% of deaths taking place in nursing homes compared with all possible settings. Next slide. And the most recent, one back, please. The most recent data that we have, it's the one after this, that's 2022. Well, that seems to have been lost, but the most recent statistics, which those of you who heard the talk this morning with Samir, where I said it's now 44%. So we know that there are risks for people living in long-term care and in assisted living during COVID. We need to recognize that many of these people were lonely, and had suboptimal mental health before the pandemic, and that this was exacerbated during the pandemic when they didn't have the support and the visits of family, when they were restricted in the programs and the kinds of things that normally would go on in a facility. Plus, on top of that, they were afraid of catching COVID. So those are the kinds of things that we've heard quite a lot of today. Next slide. We now recognize the extent of disruption that was caused by the lockdowns and the social distancing requirements. So these disruptions were in relationships, in terms of the day-to-day kind of assistance that they were people in facilities or in congregate settings would get, both from their relatives and from the staff that work there. What we also know is that many of those people that come in to assist and to be part of the program, the daily life of residents in these settings, are able to monitor and to see what's going on. And so in that sense, they were able to prevent some of the kinds of neglect or abuse that might happen. Next slide. All right, this is my missing slide about the latest data, which shows 44% of deaths from COVID are taking place in facility, which means all the rest are taking place in the community. Next slide. So we want to think about what are the risks for community living seniors. And one amongst them are the kinds of things that happen because you're living with other people. So if you're living with your children, and maybe they came to move in with you during the disaster because they lost their job and they couldn't afford to maintain a separate apartment, or it could be that you lived with family, but in normal times during the day those people were going to work. Now all of a sudden you're confined together 24 hours a day. So amongst the kinds of things that we were beginning to see would be things like the children who were suffering from job loss. And basically, you know, some of you will remember in the olden days when you were talking about sexual advances and one person saying to the other, well, if you love me, you'll let me. Well, in this case, I would say with the financial, the twist is the other person say, well, if you love me, you'll loan me. And so we see financial abuse, which is combined with psychological, because it's the implication, if you don't give me the money, you really don't love me. We also have to recognize that during this COVID period, adult day centers were closed, as were other types of respite programs. So people didn't have that to give them some breather. And home supports were either reduced or discontinued. And so we need to recognize that there's serious stresses on people living in the community, as well as those in institutional settings. Next slide. So in terms of research to date, we have the study at the top here, which showed that social isolation, financial instability, chronic condition can lead to increased depression and anxiety, which makes older people more susceptible to abuse. They have been reported to be overwhelmed, hopeless, anxious, stressed, agitated, and so on while in quarantine. And in a Canadian study, it showed that a third of those over the age of 15 reported being concerned about family stress from confinement, that is being all together 24 hours a day. And some 8% reported being fearful of and experience some violence at home. Next slide. One of our studies came from an online survey that we conducted between August and October of 2020. We had some 4,380 respondents from coast to coast in Canada, people aged 55 and over. And we asked them a series of questions that you can see listed on the slide. But what I want to do today is to, in particular, point out some of the sociodemographic characteristics of people who reported experiencing frequent family discord or physical violence, and comparing them with those of our respondents who didn't have that experience, and if the two groups sustained different rates of negative or positive emotions, which in fact we found that they did. Next slide. So we had 9 questions dealing with pandemic-related stress and social impacts. 6 of them were negative, 3 positive. And what we did was phrase our question since the outbreak of COVID-19. And the response categories were to say most of the time, some of the time, or seldom, and never. Next slide. So in this case, the people reporting stress and discord in the family setting was a relatively small number, which really was only 1.5% of this total sample, and there were a small sample more who actually said that in their experience, there were family members who were being frequently short-tempered with one another and maybe throwing things at one another, knocking over furniture and or hitting or harming. Next slide. So what we see in this slide is that in general, the people who experienced the frequent family discord or physical violence tended to be less educated than those who did not experience it. They tended to be working or laid off as opposed to being retired. And what we see in the distribution is that they're both people who are the dominant white Anglo-Saxons, and also about more than a quarter of those experiencing frequent family violence were people from the non-white community. Next slide. And what we see on this slide is that it's very clear that those are the brown bars, the people that were experiencing frequent family discord and physical violence were more depressed, more lonely, more isolated, more anxious, more sad, and felt that they were being judged or shamed. Next slide. And it was interesting that we looked at what were the things that they reported to be problematic. And in particular, the bar at the bottom was people that were experiencing this frequent discord in the family were people who had disruptions in 3 or more of their routines of life. And so that, when you put that together with the previous finding, it's the people who were working and who were most, whose routines were most disrupted. And we also see that amongst this group, they sometimes didn't have enough food, which suggests neglect. If they're living with other people, they had more difficulty accessing medical needs. And they certainly were more likely to experience contact with their support systems. Next slide. So this slide just summarizes what I've said, and I want to draw your attention that if we have a full report on that survey, And to note that the sample was limited to people who read English and who had access to a computer. So the rates could be higher as immigrants and people of lower education or attainment where education tend to be underrepresented. Next slide. The second study is our analysis of a survey that was conducted by the Canadian Longitudinal Study on Aging. And in this one, we compared participants 55 and over who reported increased verbal and or physical conflict. So, and for those of you who are not familiar with CLSA, it's a national cohort study of some 51,000 Canadians who were age 45 to 85 at baseline, and they are followed up every 3 years and will be for until 2033 or until death or loss of follow-up. Next slide. And what we see in this particular study is that the chances of experiencing increased verbal and physical conflict tended to be higher in the younger, older group, so in the 55 to 64 group, which was not what we expected. We thought that the rates would be higher in the amongst the older and more frail people within the sample. What we also see is that there was a significant number of a difference between males and females, and in this case, the indicator was that there was more verbal and physical conflict experienced by males than by females. And in particular, when we looked at sexual orientation, and we've known for some time that people in the LGBT plus community were likely to be more at risk. In fact, this data supports that, and that there were somewhat higher rates experiencing conflict during COVID. Next slide. And we see a little bit of difference here that the rate's a bit higher in the non-white community, again, in people who were less educated, and in people who were living with at least one other person. So we hear a lot about people living alone and socially isolated, but what we need to recognize is that some types of abuse are more likely if you're living with other people than if you're living alone. Next slide. So this shows some of the kinds of variables, the kinds of things that we looked at and that are that show some association with increased verbal or physical conflict. Next slide. But the most important of these would be a past history of psychological abuse, the living arrangement, as we said, with people if you're living with other people, you are more likely for this kind of abuse. Gender, males being somewhat more subjected to it. And if you had a higher depression score or a higher anxiety score. Next slide. So I also want to mention very briefly that other types of abuse that people experience in a disaster situation are frauds and scams. And these are things that are perpetuated by people who you don't know and who are not related or where you're not in a relationship of trust. There were reports at the beginning and continuing of people being victimized when they tried to buy puppies online and looking for some kind of companionship, which turned to be animal, if not human. Next. And you may not be aware that there is something called the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center, which gives some statistics, and it also tells you about the kind of things to beware of. And next slide are some specific examples of people that that come and offer to clean your ducts, and they'll give you a sale price, and they say, well, this will give you filters that protect you from COVID-19, where it's actually a scam. And there's various kinds of scams that have been created that we're seeing, during COVID-19, not the ones that we saw before, but now some new ones. And even there are things coming across on the internet where it looks like it's a legitimate charity, but you really have to be very careful. Look at at their email address, and to make sure that you're not clicking on to something that's going to rip you off. Next slide. And certainly, the frauds and scams are not just a Canadian problem. There's data that has come from various parts of the world saying, be careful. If it looks too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. And that be careful before you buy something or give out your own information. Next slide. So in terms of the way forward, next slide, we need to make sure that gender and aging issues are included in all phases of disaster. So before disasters happen, we need to make sure that women and gender minorities are included in the planning for response. We want to make sure that during a disaster, that gender-based health and hygiene and security needs are addressed, because we've seen in the past that they have not been. And in particular, older people cannot just simply be put into the same kind of situation, like where many of them in Texas were in the Astrodome, and where they really had very little support or very little ways of knowing, what to do, where to go, how to move to the next stage. And post-disaster, there is data suggesting that it's older people tend to not know where to apply, what they're entitled to, or to get what they're entitled to. Next slide. So we also want to recognize that the risk and protective factors are different depending on your living arrangement. And these days, we hear a lot of the slogan "safer at home" to promote people staying at home as a means of not getting COVID, but the potential for violence spikes when people are spending 24/7 in the home with their abuser. And the abuser could be a spouse, could be a child, could be another relative, could be a hired pet or a paid caregiver or a volunteer. And so living alone may be a protective factor for physical abuse, but a risk factor for financial abuse, fraud, and scams. Next slide. We also want to recognize that like COVID-19, elder abuse has no borders or boundaries. Some of you may recognize this slide. That's Mickey Rooney, and he was victimized by his son, and it was his testimony to the US Senate that really drew attention to elder abuse in the USA, and that brought it onto the radar of the politicians, and it subsequently led to some increases in services available. Thank you. And next slide. And the one after that, please. Just shows our full research team, and the following slide, how you can contact us. And a disclosure of that these are our views and not those of Canadian Longitudinal Study. Next slide. So thank you very much, and I hope you found this interesting. And now let's move